Hey, and here we are live once again in the spoiler room. Thank you so much for joining us, coming down the stairs, grabbing your favorite beverage, and we'll stay away from the gold scarab on the bar. You never know what might happen to you if you touch it, but we're going to tell you what might happen with tonight's film. Yes, we are rounding out our no expiration date month with a look at another immortal a story involving immortality basically and yeah, I've got my good right hand man and friend here with me tonight, Mr. Ian Simmons, to talk about Cronos from 1993. How you doing, Ian?
I'm doing wonderful. I can't wait to talk about this movie with you.
I am rather excited. Guillermo del Toro's first feature, and yeah, you want to give the synopsis of it?
I hate you. Um, all
Nothing but
right,
love.
so now I'm a little fuzzy on the origin because I was so wrapped up in the visuals that the narrative mythology kind of passed me by. Plus, it reminded me a lot of the mythology that they added to Clive Barker's Hellraiser universe in that fourth movie where they went to space. It's in the I think it was the Spanish Inquisition. Someone requisitioned craftsmen to create this beautiful device. Is the Cronos device, and it's basically this golden scarab that can grant eternal life to the person who had commissioned it. Now, that eternal life, the circumstances under which it grants these powers, the public was not privy to it, but we got somewhat of an idea of what it took to do this. In that there was a naked body hung over a basin that was being bled out. Years, I think centuries later, this building collapsed, and in the wreckage, they found this person who this was ostensibly immortal. But I think it was because they had like a giant piece of iron or glass rammed through their heart, and their heart was destroyed. They died, but the scarab somehow made its way into an antique angel statue, which cut to an old man named Mr. Jesus Gris and his granddaughter Aurora. They have an antique, or he has an antique shop, and this angel statue is in it. And there's a businessman who comes looking for it, Mr. De La Guardia, and his nephew Angel, played by Ron Perlman. If you haven't figured out yet, this movie is full of religious imagery. We've got Angel and Jesus. They even have a talk about how insects are symbols of the resurrection, with mosquitoes walking on water just like Christ. But anyway, Mr. Gree finds this scarab and he puts it in his hand, and all of a sudden it comes to life and latches onto him and starts draining his blood, or maybe infusing him with bloodlust, and he becomes a very unconventional sort of vampire. Now, meanwhile, Angel and his boss, Mr. De La Guardia, they are trying to get the scarab too, because Mr. De La Guardia is very old and he's on death's door. He's had cancer numerous times, and he knows about the legend of this scarab. He has the ancient instruction manual, but he doesn't have the actual bug. So he's trying to track this thing down, and things come to a head with Jesus and De La Guardia, and yeah, wackiness ensues. Bloody myth-inspired madness, wackiness.
Yeah, this was a first watch for me.
Me too.
I had heard about it, talked about it. Heard it talked about in many circles. I'm a fan of Guillermo del Toro's work, visuals especially. There's just something about his visuals, especially stuff like Pan's Labyrinth, or even freaking Pacific Rim, which I really love. He's got he's got a visual style that he brings to film that's definitely his, and that's evident here in this film. And man, I like this film a lot. I really enjoyed this film. It's like this dark, twisted version of Cinema Paradiso.
Before we get into it, have you seen The Devil's Backbone?
It's been a long time, but yeah, I did. It's been a while, but yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I did see The Devil's Backbone.
Yeah, because I feel like this, like Cronos, The Devil's Backbone, and Pan's Labyrinth. I mean, I know Criterion put them together in they did like an edition
Mhm.
like a series of Blu-rays with like kind of art that kind of matched each other. But yeah, this is a great little unofficial trilogy. This is a hell of a way to start it off. I mean, he makes the most out of what I assumed was a pretty low budget.
Well, it was
By
high. It was a high budget for Mexico, but it was low budget in terms of Hollywood films and that
so
two
what was
million, 2 million, I think it was. He went
in
over
in
budget
U.S.
by
dollars?
yeah, in 1993. I believe it's in U.S. dollars. I'd have to double check, but it was a 1.5 million was the budget, and he went over, and he got the other 500,000 through loans and debt. He
Well,
basically he basically pulled a Kevin Smith in that, he ran up a bunch
I
of
was just gonna
credit
say,
cards.
yeah. Well, and it shows, and I wonder what the breakdown there is. Not that
Mhm.
it looks like a cheap movie, but I wonder if you had to pay, you got to get Ron Perlman, but mostly you've got to get when we go inside the scarab and
Oh,
we see that
man.
there's like a living creature that's like this kind of like a demon succubus worm thing. You never really get a good look at it. You get a kind
Mm-mm.
of look at its parts, and then there's the drawing in the books. There's a lot of imagination. But when you look inside of there, it looks like they built this full scale gold factory with this giant thing in there. I don't know if that's miniatures or if you had to spend $500,000 to build this intricate set, because it looks amazing.
Yeah, when you go inside that thing, I did not expect us to go in there, go inside it. And you get that first shot, you're like, where am I? And you're like, oh, this looks awesome. I think they're somewhat miniatures. Knowing Guillermo, and especially it being 93, it probably was, because it would have been cheaper to make, not full huge size, probably like just enough for your camera, but still, it was like impressive some of the stuff you get. And yeah, the creepy creature, and the fact that what's interesting is it there's not a huge amount of action
Mm-mm.
in this film, yet there's tension, there's some wonderful elements, there's elements of horror in here, humor as well. That's what I loved about it, is that I'm like, this is a subdued film if you look at it overall, outside of one scene near the very end where he confronts Angel finally on the scaffolding. Outside of that, maybe that one scene, there's really not a whole lot as far as action.
Yeah, and there's some graphic elements to it, like
Mhm.
with the scarab latching onto the hand and the chest, and
Right.
a little pincher coming out and going into the wrist. And then certainly with the old man when he dies and comes back as this essentially corpse that's got a person who's inside him trying to come out, like you can peel away the layers of skin and see new skin underneath. That's kind of a cool effect. There's some disturbing stuff in here,
Mhm.
but it really is a sweet story, and it is surprisingly funny. And what I love about it is I can watch this even if I didn't know who it was. I would say
Mhm.
that's a Guillermo del Toro movie. I'm not a fan of all of his films,
Mhm.
specifically Specific Rim, um, but
Well,
I can
we'll
always.
agree to disagree with on that one.
Well, I know, but I'm so used to being correct that I'll let it go. Um, but no, regardless of what I thought about that movie, I
Mhm.
could tell that there is a guy who, whether it's his first film or his 10th film, he still has that giddiness of like,
Mhm.
I get to play and I get to make my childhood fantasies, deep and twisted and weird as they are, play out on screen exactly as I want them. And that's evident here. It's beautiful to watch.
And he also has the element to a lot of his movies that I mean, you're a far more refined movie watcher than myself, but foreign cinema, child in peril in movies, or children in films that aren't exactly happy-go-lucky, is not something that was really prevalent for a long time in US cinema, and still really kind of isn't. A little
Mhm.
bit more nowadays with Stranger Things in it, but especially back when this was being made, and that it was starting to where they were taking more chances. But for me, his other film is the first film where I saw an actual on-screen kid death mimic. You know, I That's the first time, and that blew me away. I'm like, whoa, foreign cinema has had children in peril and being in dark films for quite some time, but Mimic was like one of the first times I saw on like a big wide release film a kid getting aced on screen. It usually was off screen or through dialogue or whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, and Del Toro is no stranger to doing that. Certainly in his Spanish films, because one of the things connecting this with Pan's Labyrinth and Devil's Backbone is this story of not exactly orphan children per se, but yeah, kind of, because
Kind of.
Aurora in this movie, she's living with her grandparents. They never really say, I don't think, what happened to her folks. Her grandfather does tell a story about her dad, but it's just a story about when his dad was younger. It wasn't like, yeah, this is what happened before your parents were in that car wreck.
Yeah.
And that's one of the other cool things about this is there is a mythology, and I have no doubt that Guillermo del Toro knows exactly how all of this works, but he doesn't share all of it with us. He doesn't tell us, was this demon thing that lives inside the scarab, this vampire, worm or whatever, where does it come from? It is established that there are rules, but we don't learn all of them. We don't know if there's 5 rules or 50. We understand that there's some kind of like vampire-esque lore to it. But even at the end of the film, we're left with a whole bunch of questions. This is one of the rare vampire movies where, and I don't even know if we can call them vampires. It's the closest thing we have. But there is a bloodlust, but it's not like the grandfather is, compelled to kill the people that he loves.
No.
There is a little bit of a struggle, but he's not like a mindless maniac, and he's not evil.
He's not trying to every other turn get some blood from Aurora, from his granddaughter at all. But he does have, whenever he's confronted with blood, he's like, oh, hey, go time.
Right. But there's not, I mean, he does, I think, maybe he asked it of De La Guardia, but asking if he had to feed on humans or cows or something like that. But yeah, he's not. There's not like this conversation where like, well, if I go kill criminals or bad people, then that's fine. He's still trying to figure this whole thing out, and he doesn't figure it all out because realistically, there isn't. Well, I don't know about realistic vampires, but a lot of these movies, there's someone to show up and explain the rules to the person, all that stuff. It's very much a grounded kind of situation here.
Well, and also, though, it's alluded to a little bit because my son watched some of this, not all of it, but some of it. And it's kind of alluded to that he may have not read all the rules, but when he got his hands on the book, when he's confronting LaGuardia, and he brings this, supposedly brings the scarab. They show him the book, and he actually does look through some of the pages and kind of stays on some of them. It makes you wonder that, again, like you said, they don't say for sure whether or not, but perhaps he read a few of the pages and picked up a little bit more about what's going on.
They held on that, but I would hazard a guess to say no, because it's established that because these pages were supposed to be so top secret when they were written, that they were written in Latin.
Oh, backwards. Yeah, that's true. That's true. So, he couldn't read Latin backwards. That's true. Now that you mention it, yeah, never mind.
He had that concentrated face they're holding on him. He was like, what the hell is this?
It's bad enough it's written in Latin. It's written in Latin backwards, which, again, we're talking about religious imagery and such through here. I mean, we're talking immortality, giving them life and that. Latin backwards is a bit of a demonic implication there because, it's Latin, but written backwards. I've seen a few horror movies in my days, just a few. And sometimes when it comes to rituals, you're reading Latin or you stuff backwards usually is evil.
What if he had just put on a Judas Priest album backwards? Maybe that was the instructions for that book. That's what we were all missing during the Satanic Panic.
That's what we were all missing. It just here, hold it up in a mirror. You could read it. There you go. Now you can read it properly. But you're right. I mean, it's one of those things. People hear me mention it, and I'm sure they're tired of it ad nauseum. But I don't mind a film that doesn't hold my hand, and this film doesn't hold your hand, but it tells enough of the story and presents enough to you visually to where if you do just a little bit of thinking, you could probably draw your own conclusions to things. Now, whether or not that's true or not, the filmmaker Guillermo here is not telling you this is the way it is. How you come up with it in your head, or what the actual full rules are for this vampire, you're not going to be wrong, because he doesn't tell you what they are. He's leaving it to your imagination of what they could be. I mean, when he starts peeling the skin and he's white underneath, that opens up all kinds of interesting ideas of the reincarnation of this guy, and just what does he look like completely skinned, with old skin gone.
Right. And you kind of wonder, because at the end we see him, and his whole body essentially is not only that white skin, but it's almost ridged, sort of like a
Right.
pattern, almost like you'd see in a Hellboy movie later on.
Insect like, some would say.
Yeah, very much. So is that like if once he has a chance to grow, it's going to fill in more flesh colored, or take it back to that building collapse. The alchemist who died, the original
Right.
owner of the scarab, his skin was described as strange skin, the color of marble and moonlight.
Right.
So had he recently shed, or are we to understand that Mr. Greed now is just going to look like this?
I think we're understanding that Mr. Gree is going to look like this. And given what happens to the scarab, or what he does to it, it makes you wonder how long he's actually going to live. Because it's kind of implied that as long as the scarab's intact, whoever it has enchanted, as long as you don't get a stake through the heart, you're going to live for forever. You might just have to shed some skin occasionally. But at the end, I know we're jumping around. At the end, though, he crushes the scarab and he's laying in the bed. And you're like, okay, he must be dying, but he's completely white, like you said. And
he's with his granddaughter and his wife. Now,
right.
here's the thing. What do we know about, the devil? He's the prince of lies. So let's assume that whatever created this scarab, or allowed this insect to be inside the scarab, was a creation of the devil, or, dark forces. What better insurance policy to keep this thing active on Earth than to say, you don't want to destroy this because it's going to wreck everything?
Yeah.
Maybe the key, if you've been taken over by this thing, is to actually destroy it.
Destroy
and
it.
hopefully you've got some loved ones hanging around.
Yeah. That might be the case too. Yeah, where the rule is, well, sure, no, you don't want to destroy that. No, don't destroy that. No. What I also got a little bit from it, and I don't know if he was intentionally, it had to be a bit of intention of the idea of a drug, because you have the insertion of basically a needle. He's doing it in private. You have the one scene in the bathroom where he puts it on his chest, and you have the dialogue and the whole scene. If you didn't know this scarab was a demonic worm possessed scarab that provides immortality, if you just listen to this scene, the way it plays out, you think he's a junkie.
Oh yeah, you've got the kind of the dazed look, the whole ritual of preparation, the needle imagery, the idea that you're right. He puts it on his chest. Addicts will, you've seen it in movies. I don't know how actual addicts, heroin addicts work, but the arms, once it's poked so full of holes, you have to go to like the other arm or your leg or your eyeball, just looking for a place you can put it.
Or to hide it, they put it between their fingers or between their toes. They'll inject that way to cover up the injection marks.
This is really cheery stuff, Mark.
Is it? Lovely. But I mean, I got that impression too, especially when he has the scarab and he's on the stairs. When it's and I know it has to be intentional. You get that feeling of that he's an addict almost, because he goes on the stairs and he has it, and all of a sudden he's all sweaty because he had it, and he's on the stairs and there's the Christmas tree right there. I mean, this is classic Del Toro right here. I mean, just gonna clash it with visuals. You got the beautiful Christmas tree, you got him just sweating and getting his juice from the demon worm, and then his granddaughter comes out and is watching this from this, from the balcony or whatever, and he doesn't realize it right away. So she witnesses all of this, and you realize she's witnessing all of this, and it's like, oh my God.
Well, yeah, it's just the idea of him going back to do that again,
and then going back and doing it again. Yeah,
Right, but after the first time when this thing nearly bores a hole into his hand and he's all bandaged up, and then later you see him like trying to get at the wound through the bandages, and you're like, does it hurt? Is there something coming out of him? It's like, no, he just needs to get free so he can do it again. And that
Right.
you're right, the drug metaphor is completely apt. It's
Hmm.
something that's painful, but it's so instantly addictive that you can't help yourself but to
Well,
go back
because
to
it
it.
well because it makes him young. He realizes after the first dose what it does to him. And holding on to, and it's not like it makes him like, "Hi, I'm Tom Cruise," but it makes him noticeable younger at first. His characteristics start to fade away of the old man that we first see, which then
And
makes him appealing to his wife, which is a whole nother statement.
well, and that's the genius of it too, is that a mustache does a
Mhm.
lot. Because Mr. Green, when you first see him, he looks like an old man. He's kind of hunched over and tired and old looking. He's got this, gray mustache. By the way, Mr. Gree is, Mr. Gray, and he's wearing gray all the time.
Yes.
Um, but when he shaves the mustache, he looks 20 years younger.
Mhm.
And it doesn't look like they did any special makeup to like cover up wrinkles. He just looks more youthful. Although the drawback is, and this bugged the crap out of me up until he turned into that zombie,
Yeah.
the shaved faced Mr. Gree looks like Leslie Nielsen. Go back and watch this movie with that in mind,
Oh
and you
my
will
god.
not be able to get it out of your head.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Okay, yeah, I can kinda see it, yeah. I was trying to figure out who he was, who he looked like. Yeah, I can see Leslie Nielsen. Uh,
And don't call me Jesus.
don't call me.
The Christmas theme is interesting because they also have, the world's worst New Year's party aftermath.
Oh my
And I
god,
love,
yeah.
in addition to the religious imagery, of course, time plays a big
Mhm.
factor in this, because one of the things that Mr. Gree prizes most in his, shop, he's got like the domes for like clockwork and stuff. But
Yeah.
there is literally an old guy dressed up as a giant clock that we see in this New Year's party. It's like, I get it, but it's also awesome because
I
it's so
love
weird.
I love the guy in the clock costume, I really did.
He looked like a
Um,
sad French mime that was just like, "Oh, I'm a work in the clock party."
what
That was not French. I don't know what
that
that
was
was.
I have no idea what that was, but that's okay. Uh, you get a E for effort.
I got an F for effort.
Effort. But what's interesting though is just having him there. It almost feels like, well, this must be like some kind of almost like a corporate party for her, or something. That they're going to, that allows them to bring their granddaughter with. So it's kind of a family gathering thing, I guess. Um, and yeah, well, it's just an interesting dynamic between him and his wife too, because as he becomes younger, suddenly she's attracted to him again, because there's a dance partner scene where she and her dance partner seem to be a little more chummy than Jesus likes at all. And it's implied that she kind of, nothing's fully happening, but she definitely is looking elsewhere.
Well, and it's not only that she seems to be more attracted to him. It's like as he's getting younger, it's almost like he's remembering what he loved about his wife.
Right.
And I
Yeah.
think that's why, he's writing that letter to her, at the end. And it is very sweet. You could
Mhm.
almost take out all of the, scarab stuff and just have this a weird fantasy movie about a guy who's growing like a Benjamin Button type of a thing. And it would totally work because these performances are really, touching. Now, going back to Kevin Smith for a moment, Aurora, did she not say anything the entire movie except for the very end where she says grandfather?
Um,
'Cause I don't like, I
I
only started noticing about maybe 20 minutes into the movie. I'm like, "She hasn't said anything."
he act I don't think she does until the end. I don't have to watch it again, but you know what? She doesn't, but uh the Frederico Lupe, who if I mispronounce that, I apologize, but Frederico, who plays Jesus, acts so well and has conversations with her, you don't notice whether or not she actually says anything.
Yeah.
But I think you're right. Now that you mention it, hadn't thought about it before. I don't think either she said anything till the very end. which makes her speaking even more mean a lot more, because he has conversations with her as if she's talking to him, but I don't think you're right, she ever has actual dialogue.
Which makes me wonder about like that. Again, this is a credit to Del Toro. It just makes me wonder about that family dynamic. Like, was she traumatized by whatever happened to her parents? So she's
Mm-hmm.
just kind of like inside of herself. There is just a beautifully touching scene where he comes back, from literally from the dead.
Yeah.
He's been put, in the mortuary, made up by the mortician and everything, only to find out that he's going to be cremated, and that's a really funny moment. But he escapes. He goes back, to his home, and he's hiding out with his granddaughter, and realizes that wherever they are, there's like light streaming in through these holes
Mm-hmm.
in the ceiling, and it starts to burn him.
Yeah.
And she puts him into a trunk as a makeshift coffin, but he's in there with like blankets and her teddy bears and stuff. I'm
Teddy
like,
bears.
I wonder, someone needs to put out like a Cronos box set, where they have, the Blu-ray case looks like the book.
Sure.
They have like a replica of the scarab, and it comes in this trunk.
Yeah.
That's a missed opportunity. They should do that.
Dang you, Criterion, where are your thoughts for that? But speaking of interesting dynamics, we have Mr. Ron Perlman as the nephew of Del Guardia. Now, I was of Del Guardia. Now, I was reading a little bit. Apparently, you mentioned about how Perlman, his salary for this budget, he took a massive pay cut so they could finish the film, actually.
Okay.
And he and Del Toro have been friends for quite some time. I think even before this, but definitely after this. But you have his character who was supposed to, I guess, be fluent in speaking Spanish, but Ron Perlman doing it, Guillermo was so like, he does like, no. So instead, he decided to play up the American part to where he hates being, his character Angel hates being in Mexico so much that when he does have to speak in Spanish, he says it with like, he just does it the worst possible way because he hates the fact that he actually has to say it, and that's the way they played it, and I think that works to his character.
I do too, and I don't speak Spanish, but it sounded like the Spanish that he did speak, he spoke it very well.
Yeah.
And maybe they just gave him like little bits, you're right,
Mhm.
he's not giving any monologues or anything, just like little bits here and there, and kind of incorporate it into his American or his English dialogue.
Mhm.
But yeah, he's terrific in this movie. It's a very weird part. It reminded me of his character in Drive,
Mhm.
just this kind of like hired, thug who, goes after, he's like an enforcer for, I think, Albert Brooks's character. I haven't seen that movie in 10 years, but yeah, it's weird after seeing him in Hellboy and these other projects to see him just play this weird character in 1993. I guess as he was like between Beauty and the Beast and what would become, his big resurgence.
Yeah.
It's cool.
It was at this moment that Ian didn't realize Mark's never watched Drive. Anyway,
Well, if you ever want to talk about Drive is a movie that I saw once in the theater.
Mhm.
I detested it, and I've never watched it since. But I have a feeling that because I'm doing the whole slow cinema thing, I might find something to recommend. I'd be very curious to find out what you think, because my recollection is nothing happens. Like 3 minutes worth of things happen within that 2 hour goddamn movie, and they all happen at the end. So I'm like, okay, finally, now I can go home.
Well, it's Ryan Gosling. He's kind of hit or miss with me, more miss than hit, but he makes some interesting films. I just, him personally, he's not one of those where, oh, hey, it's Ryan Gosling, I got to check it out. But when I do check out a film, he makes interesting films. I'm not going to say
Yeah.
they aren't interesting for sure. I don't seek them out. I did see the other one that he did.
The Notebook.
No, not the Notebook. Was it God's something? What the heck was it?
Oh, Only
uh,
God Forgives,
yeah,
or
Only God Forgives. That's what it
okay.
was. I watched that one and I liked that one, the cinematography in that, but I digress. We're not here to talk about Ryan Gosling or
But
his small ears, but
before we get
um,
off Ryan Gosling, that
yes,
sounds really bad. Did you ever seriously, have you ever watched The Notebook?
once.
Okay. Did you cry at the end?
I don't remember.
Well, that may indicate that you didn't. So you
Probably
possibly are a sociopath.
I may be a sociopath. If I did and didn't cry, I'm a sociopath. If I don't remember crying, I may not have watched it. I don't remember if I
I'm just saying, I don't know any, and this is like the big joke, like, oh, it's The Notebook. But I
Mhm,
don't know any guy who has watched The Notebook and not been an absolute mess at the end. Yeah, it's a chick
mhm.
flick, but they knew how to, I think, was that Nick Cassavetes?
Yeah.
Yeah, like
Mhm,
pulling those strings like so masterfully that,
mhm,
like, I watched that with a room, like, couples, and we
mhm.
all got dragged into watching it because the girls wanted to, and by the end, like, everyone was like, where's the Kleenex? And that was the
Yeah.
dudes.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
I cried during Never Ending Story, but no, I don't
Oh,
remember ever crying for yeah, talk about children in peril and scarring kids, but that's a whole
oh
other
my god, I still
conversation.
wince whenever I think about the shard that was stuck into that wolf, like, when it attacked
Oh,
Atreyu. I'm like, oh my,
yeah.
ugh,
Yeah. Or Artex, poor Artex.
no.
Oh, but back to Kronos. See what happens. Ryan Gosling just gets us on a tangent, but uh, Ron Perlman did this. Yeah, he is crazy, but I I loved his character in this. I just this guy who he wears exactly his intentions on his sleeve. I mean, we when we first really see him meet up with his uncle who wants him to try to find they're trying to find this scarab. He's got all these angel statues hanging by chains in his room, along with a cabinet full of body parts that have been removed because of the cancer. But so Ron Perlman's angel, he comes up with this paper to his uncle and goes, "Oh, here's the latest copy of her will. Do you want to sign that, please?" He's not even being subtle about it. He's like, "Here."
Well, and that made me wonder if the old man, like, at the outset, the old man was a vampire or something like that, because, like, why would you need to like, have multiple, like, editions of your will unless things keep changing around?
It makes you wonder about that. I was kind of interested in his story because I'm like, first off, you've got body parts, in jars that have been removed from your body. But what I was thinking about his motivation is, and it is implied that you do kind of you do heal
Hmm.
from a current injury, but they never go into would he heal from past injuries or not, because I wouldn't want to live forever and be stuck with cancer for like ever. You don't die from cancer, but you're still suffering the pain and everything from cancer. But hey, I live forever. Woo!
Well, and that's the other thing, though, is like living forever, but there's still that caveat, like what happened with
A little
the
blood
Alchemist.
drinking. Yeah.
Well, not only that, but like the Alchemist, it's like,
Mhm.
okay, Ron Perlman, Angel makes a joke when he figures out like what the old man is really after. He's like, all he does is shit and piss all day, and he wants to live forever.
Yeah.
There is something to that. Like, you're not gonna go skydiving or do anything like really perilous, because yeah, I could fall off. It doesn't mean I'm a vampire. I can fly around. If I fall off a cliff somewhere and get impaled on a bunch of rocks, I'm still gonna die
Yeah.
horribly. Or maybe I'll just live forever impaled on this rock if nobody finds me.
Yeah. I love that line from him. And yeah, his character is just interesting, and the rule with immortality, the motivation of De La Guardia. You're like, okay, and we're not given all the rules. And again, I'm not asking him to, but it that's what I like, is that it makes you wonder, it makes you think. And I like films like this because you're seeing this character and you're kind of building your own story, and that's okay. You know,
Well,
the,
that's, yeah. I mean, there's a difference between, and I can spot it instantly. I can tell the filmmakers who, like Del Toro, most of the time, have an entire mythology mapped out in their head,
Right.
and they're giving you this hour and a half glimpse into a section of that. But he has all the answers, and he's giving you just enough so you can follow along and imagine the rest. Versus someone who's like, I'm just gonna, put all this out there. It's whatever you bring to it, man. And I'm not gonna explain it because it's inexplicable. I'm like, you don't have any answers, do you? Like, no, man, but it doesn't matter because it's like, use your imagination. I'm like, no, you have to meet me halfway.
Yeah, you can tell he has a whole world built in Cronos. It's just he's not going to give you all the world because that's his world. He wants you to have your world in it. Here's the elements. It's almost like role playing in some respects. It's like he's being a dungeon master of sorts, in that he's guiding you, but he's leaving it up to you to make your decisions on what certain things mean, or what how things are in many ways.
And what really struck me is how perfect it was that he hooked up with Mike Mignola for
Mhm.
Hellboy,
Oh yeah.
because there's so much in Cronos that's in the Hellboy movie, but then you
Mhm.
realize that the Hellboy movie was largely adapted from the Hellboy comics. Everything from the Cronin character, who is
Mhm.
essentially a human Nazi watch assassin that gets
Yeah.
wound up like our Scarab, to the whole idea of the Della Guardia business. I don't even know what the hell they did. Are they an importer or whatever? It
I
looks almost like a factory floor, but then you go, take this elevator and you go up to this immaculate inner sanctum where you have to like wear a mask and everything's purified because the old man's like afraid of getting sick and dying. But the idea of like the secret society down to like the BPRD, where you go into this, almost like the Men in Black thing. You go into a building
Yeah.
that looks very industrial. And it's a secret underground base. Like all these things that he would do later in his career are planted here. And it's just
Mhm.
cool to see.
Oh yeah, you could definitely, and that's what I love seeing early films of filmmakers who especially have their own unique style, and seeing those buds, or seeing that they've really had this type of vision all along. They've looked at cinema, or their stories of how they want to present them in this style from the beginning. I mean, sure, it's evolved, but at the same time, you get all those elements in here that you've seen Hellboy or Pan's Labyrinth. I mean, it definitely has a Pan's Labyrinth tone to it in some respects, a little bit lighter. Thank you, because Pan's Labyrinth that's one that I'll watch occasionally, but that's one that you don't just go, wow, I've had a great day. I think I'm just gonna sit down and watch Pan's Labyrinth, and then by the end of it, you're like, oh, I shouldn't have done that.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting point. I mean, Pan's Labyrinth is a war movie. It takes
Mhm.
place in the middle of conflict and death and danger all around. This this is a very small movie. It takes place in a town that it's not the most prosperous, but it's not a slum. People are just kind of going about their day-to-day business, but within these buildings there's like these little dramas going on, and it really is just a conflict between two old men at the end of the day
Well,
fighting over an antique.
I would even go so far as to say that the story itself takes place in just a small neighborhood of the city. It's not even a full, like a small town. It's just a neighborhood of a small town. Like this
Yeah.
is, where you hear the stories of the Hatfields and McCoys type of thing. It's to where here you have, the old man trying to stay young, and the sick old man who wants to be healed and live, and you got that conflict between them. And I loved the bit because Angel shows up to get the statue, and he wraps up the statue. This is just after he discovers the Kronos device in there, but he doesn't give up the Kronos device. He's like, oh, here, sure, here you go, have the statue. Yeah, by all means. And so when it's not in there and they suspect he has it, well, he comes the next morning feeling refreshed and young, and his place is just thrashed. I mean, just trashed. And he goes looking for the items, and that and you feel his pain that this place has just been trashed. But at the same time, it's a small town. They're not that far away. They can't be that far away with the way it happened, is where I'm going. So this is more like a conflict between rivals in a small town, in
Yeah.
a neighborhood. you know.
Right, and he even leaves the calling card, you know, on the
Mhm.
on the back it's in handwritten, you know, "We'll be here, we'll be open all night," or something.
Yeah, we're
Um,
open all night. And then
yeah.
where I was going with this, now that my brain assembled itself again, my apologies. What I loved is when he brings the supposed scarab to De La Guardia, and it feels heavy, like it's in there. He's like, "Oh, great, thanks for showing me the book. Peace out." Um, it's the two broken locks that were originally cut, and I loved that just little bit, like that was cool. And there's just those little bits throughout this film that that endears this film to me, you know.
Yeah, I'm it's definitely one of those situations where I'm bummed that I rented it off of Amazon for $4 because I'm gonna buy the Blu-ray, you know,
We get the
at some point.
Criterion.
Oh yeah, yeah. And I also love that too because having no reference for this movie, I see the artwork on that Criterion box. I'm like, that's cool, but I don't know what I'm looking at. Now I know what I'm looking at. I'm like, oh, that's really cool. Um, I wonder if they, you know, that $500,000 over budget they went
Mhm.
was how much of that was to make the life-size glowing De La Guardia business neon sign on top of the scaffolding on top of the building, because I was thinking about that. I'm like, this is Del Toro's first film. It's an independent film essentially. uh Wherever he was in Mexico, did there just happen to be a De La Guardia company and he just like wrote the, oh, that character's De La Guardia, that'll be very easy, maybe we can get the business to let us film there? Or did they actually build that sign?
I'm not sure on that. He may have just named his character because he could use it then, use that sign, because you know, with it being independent, you get the feeling too. And again, I didn't look it up or haven't heard the commentary. Went into this film cold myself. It almost felt like Guillermo though was very familiar with this area that he's filming in. You know, and I'm gonna say that when they did the little conflict up there with the big sign and everything, I had a little inkling of the film we talked about last week, Highlander, with these guys fighting up, eh, fighting in quotes. It's not like it's a huge fight or anything, but you know, having the main boss battle, if you will, on top of a scaffolding by a light. I was just like, huh, this just has a shade of Highlander to it.
Well, and just like that, there can be only one.
There, there
um
can be only one. Yes.
Well, I'll tell you, it wasn't much of a fight, and that's what I loved about one of the many things I loved is we don't get all the rules about this vampirism. Usually, when we hear about vampire movies, you live forever, you drink blood, but you also get like superhuman strength.
Yeah.
In this case, he was still just a doddering old man who had just come back from the dead, so he's still like ultra, you know, weak. And then you got Ron Perlman, who's like, you know, 30 years old and like buff, and he kills people for a living or whatever. Just beating the crap out of him on top of this scaffolding, and it, you know, it cuts to a wide shot and you just see him, what it looked kind of like he was beating a dummy because the hair and the
Yeah.
head's kind of
Yeah.
like floppy, you know, but it still feels really brutal. And then you cut back, I'm like, okay, how is he going to get out of this? And then he delivers, you know, Jesus delivers this great line. He says, "You've got more to lose. For me, it's just pain."
Yeah.
And then he distract because Aurora is like down below, and
Mhm.
Angel is trying to grab at her, but Jesus just does this look like, what's like the whole like, what's that? And Angel's like, what is that? And then they both just
He
plummet
just he runs
down to this
into him
greenhouse.
and crashes into this greenhouse. It's like their one stunt that they were able to afford that you could only do probably once. You could, I mean, on an indie budget, like we can only do this one. We could only do this one gag. Okay, we could do it once, but it was very effective. And yeah, him, you know, doing what someone who can heal would probably do in that situation when they can't actually fight someone. They you know, they did it in the film that you didn't care for. I know, The Old Guard, but they did that as well. Uh, that's all I'll mention about The Old Guard.
You know, they
But
kind of did something also, and Freddy got fingered. No,
touche. Okay, touche, touche. All right,
Mark,
truce, truce.
you've got more to lose. For me, it's just pain.
Very, very true. Yeah, you know, and the bringing it back a bit too, we mentioned earlier a few times the insect imagery. There's that too, not only with especially at the end when we get to see Jesus in all of his reborn, almost chrysalis type glory, to where he's kind of that butterfly thing. And there's I'm sure some religious imagery in there as well, whereas he's glowing rather bright now. He's shed the dark skin, that the dead skin, his old self. He is a new person. He's got his family together. His wife comes in and holds his hand. He's literally glowing in the bed, and they bring the end credits, and I'm like, okay, well, were you going for something there, Del Toro? I think he was trying to do something, say something there, but
They call him Mr. Subtlety in Tinseltown. No, but I mean, that's the thing, is like, if you were just to describe the elements of this movie to someone without telling them who made it, it could sound like it'd be cheesy as hell. Everything's so on the nose, but that's just if you take, if you break the elements out. But in the context of this movie, that is like, it has the same kind of pseudo fairy tale, fable quality as his other ones, you just get swept up in it. And even when you step back to think about it, it's like, yeah, it's Jesus imagery and bug imagery, and it all works.
Yeah, it is one step away from just being a light or happy or campy, cute movie with an old guy with his granddaughter and this scarab, and Mr. Evil guy is coming after him. It's just but he doesn't cross that line. You're right. It actually is far more grounded than you might think a film like this is. And that's Del Toro. I mean, that's what he's done, even, with his later films that we saw, even in Mimic. You've got a horror movie where it's evolved roaches basically are the bad guys. And you would think, oh, come on. But they're scary. That film is creepy. Mimic is. I was impressed of how it actually creeped me out when I first saw it.
We were talking beforehand. I mentioned that watching this movie, Cronos, had completed my Del Toro filmography. I think that's untrue. I don't think I've actually watched Mimic.
Really?
Yeah.
Really? Because that was I believe that was his follow-up one to this.
Like his big American debut,
that was his,
right?
like it was American debut, yeah. Yeah, because that was the first of his that I remember the name seeing. I may have seen no, I wouldn't have seen anything else because he didn't have anything else. So yeah, the Mimic was the first one. Never mind. Quit talking under your ass, Mark. No, yeah, it is the first one of his that I saw, and I loved it because it was like the first wide release horror film in quite some time, modern, that creeped the hell out of me. I'm like, holy shit. Not just because the kid gets aced like on screen and there's a blood streak and everything. You're just like, whoa. The story itself was interesting. He's got this gothic quality to his stories, yet it's not like it's not like overly, I guess it's not like Hammer horror gothic, but it's still gothic, if anything, in spirit. But it really kind of has that, like you said, grim fairy tale, that fairy tale type of thing, but not like your Disney fairy tales. This is the fairy tales in the fairy tale book that's in the adult section, not in the kids section.
Well, Mimic came out in 97, so maybe next year we'll have to do an anniversary show.
Ooh, I'd be down for that, because it's been a while since I've watched the original Mimic. Very interesting horror film too. All of his films are interesting, and that's what I like is just his perspective, his approach to this material, stuff that if he wants it to be campy, it will. Pacific Rim. I love Pacific Rim. It's completely cheesy kaiju film. Gave me exactly what I wanted. I completely understand many people's hate and disdain for the film. That's fine. But at the same time, this is the same guy who could also make Pan's Labyrinth. He's also made Mimic. He also made Cronos. I mean, it's like, yeah, this is like it's kind of like Peter Jackson in that sense, in that you look at Lord of the Rings trilogy. Holy crap, this epic trilogy for a new generation. This is the same guy who made Dead Alive.
Yeah.
I like diverse filmmakers like that, that it's still them, but they can make that film and then just make this other film that is completely serious that you would think should be campy, but it's not. In Del Toro's case, he makes these films grounded, or at least give them some weight to it, so you realize he's not going for a campy, cheesy feel. He's telling a fairy tale. He's telling a fantasy story, but it is not a straight kids fantasy or a campy fantasy. This is a dark adult fantasy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like adult fantasy, but I don't think we can talk about that on this
Well,
show.
no, not that adult fantasy.
Oh,
right. In a sense, I mean, his aren't that mature, but they are some of his artistic style in that I look at and go, this is stuff that you would see in Heavy Metal, the magazine. If anyone's ever seen Heavy Metal, if you haven't, yes, there is some maturity, there's nudity in there, but the artwork and some of the stories that were in those magazines over the year were done by artists who didn't normally get the chance to do that stuff. A lot of the guys who did art for Cracked and Mad Magazine also did art in Heavy Metal. But there were more mature stories. They were fantasy stories. They still had a lot of fantasy elements, but they're, more mature. Guillermo's not as mature as that material, but it's close. It's kind of in between. It's, it reminds me, I mentioned, Never Ending Story, and we've done, folks, go back in our way back catalog when we talked about dark children's movies, but there was a time when they made children's films not necessarily with kids' gloves. And in a sense, Guillermo, I wouldn't say that his movies should all be for kids, but they have that spirit of the darker kids movies, only now it's a darker for the same adults, those who grew up with Dark Crystal, with with Labyrinth, with Never Ending Story, with all of those type of, heck, even Last Unicorn, Legend. Those kids who grew up with those films now are watching Guillermo's films. It's that same spirit, I think, in a way.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. I mean, I think of this kind of early trilogy, I think Devil's Backbone is probably the one that like kids could watch, and that's the most in the vein of those other 80s movies you mentioned, because it is kind of just more of a ghost story. I haven't seen it in a long time, but this Cronos and Pan's Labyrinth, there's more adult kind of R-rated stuff in there that I think Pan's Labyrinth's probably the closest, like the closest. I don't know, except for the guy getting beaten to death, the wine bottle. Jesus, never mind.
No, but I mean, the dark spirit of those. It's like the matured dark spirit from that we've seen in those 80s kids films, kind of matured into Del Toro films.
Yeah, I'm thinking like it would be great if someone could just resurrect that era of like not hand holding and because I'm so excited. I was out for a walk with my 4-year-old this evening, and we were talking about bad dreams and nightmares, and I can't remember what we were talking about, but there was some movie, like a horror movie I described to him, and he's like, "Can I watch that movie?" And I was like, "You gotta wait till you're older." He's like, "I can watch scary movies when I'm older." I'm like,
little tear. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, I just want to start watch. I want to start now. I'm like, because there's like thousands of films, and I don't feel like I have enough time.
Yeah, I had that when my oldest said that when I was walking down my oldest, who used to not even be able to walk when we had them video aisles down the horror video aisle. He couldn't handle the covers of them. Well, as he got older, he was on Twitch stream, on Steam. He had some buddies who he played video games with on Steam. Then they had their own Rabbit Room, which eventually became Cast Room, where they played horror movies. And so he sat with his buddies online and chatted during horror movies. And suddenly, like, I didn't realize he had been doing that, but he'd been doing it for months. And then suddenly we walked past the new Halloween at the time, poster. And he goes, "Oh, hey, Dad, could you take me to that?" And I just stopped, and I was like, "Oh, there's something in the air right now." uh, you know, no, that yeah, we can go, son. You bet.
You're not gonna cry the entire time, are you, Dad?
I'm not, but some other people might. Uh,
I know I
but
cried during that movie, but that's a whole other story.
but
Anyway,
but watching this and just like when we did the Welcome to Cronenberg, series, and I watched the early his first film, you see those elements, those things that got refined over the years, but they never lost really in their early films, and that's why I fell in love with Cronos, because I'm like watching this going, this is a movie I could see myself watching again, you know.
well, it's weird because I had this excitement of like feeling like I was watching this movie back in 1993 and
Hmm.
discovering a filmmaker who I would love to see their next movie. I had that feeling, even though I'm like, I've seen almost all of this guy's other movies, but it still felt like I was watching someone I'd never seen before. It was the strangest experience.
Yeah, you're watching it going, man, I wonder what other things this guy's made. Then you're like, oh wait, yeah, that's right. Oh
This
yeah.
Del Toro's got a bright future. Oh, wait. This is 28 years ago.
I think this guy's got a future ahead of him. He
Oh,
just gets a little extra support, and I think he can make it.
let me just tell you my quick Guillermo del Toro story.
Oh, sure.
I met him at Comic-Con in, I think, 2004. He was just
Hmm.
walking around the floor, and I was a comics journalist at the time, working for a now defunct website. And I went up to him and I just asked, "Hey, love your stuff. Do you think we could do an interview?" And he was like, "Sure." And he fucking wrote down his email address and gave it to me on a card. And unfortunately, the rest of that trip was so terrible that I made it home on fumes because there was like problems with the reservation
Yeah.
and the plane and all that stuff, and I quit.
Oh,
I quit the publication before I could interview Guillermo del Toro.
dude, you should have held on one more day. Just held on a little longer until you got that interview with Guillermo. Then you could like.
It was that bad of a weekend.
Wow. I was gonna say that is a whew, wow,
Yeah, I think that was also the same weekend that like it was like the next day that I met Joss
Mhm.
Whedon, and the same thing happened. Um, this is back before anybody knew about the
Yeah.
bad Joss Whedon, but he was a totally sweet guy who was like, I'm busy today, but what are you doing at 4:30 tomorrow? Like we can hang out and do an interview. I was like, well, I'm gonna be on a plane at 4:30.
Oh.
Son of a bitch.
God damn it.
Yeah.
Oh, cruel fate.
Yeah.
But Kronos, I think we'll wrap it up here. I dug it. I can't believe I haven't watched this movie until now.
But that's again, I think we've talked about this before. There's no shame in not having seen certain movies, because
Mhm.
as you get older, you get that thrill of like discovering something that back in its heyday everybody was talking about. Like, I'm just not on that wavelength, and now you get to discover it beyond hype,
Mhm.
without nostalgia or anything. You're just like, wow, this is a really cool film.
Yeah, I watching this, I'm like, this is a solid film. I'm like, I'm digging this. And just when you think it could go to certain places, he stops right before that line that would make it, maybe ridiculous or something. And that's what I love, is that he plays with that. But it's yeah, folks, check out Kronos if you haven't. I think 2 recommendations here from both of us. So
One second before
oh,
we
sure.
wrap, I just
Yeah.
want to bring up one point. A bonus of seeing this movie now
Mhm.
is that I could imagine seeing this movie in 1993 and then seeing Blade 2, a movie that, it's got Del Toro's fingerprints on it, but I was never that crazy about it
Right.
because it was just kind of another vampire movie
Mhm.
that did the standard mythology. It just had different, like, it had predator mouthed vampires, and that was kind of the thing. I can imagine watching an original take on the vampire movie, and then you see, oh my god, he's doing Blade 2. What crazy ideas is it going to unleash? And like, oh
Oh.
yeah.
Yeah.
So having seen Blade 2 and then going back and saying, oh, he's got some great ideas for what he can do with vampires, now I'm like, wow, I'm seeing it in the exact right order.
Mhm. And who knows, maybe part of the reason why this got lost amongst me is because I was headed to college, and well, there was a certain other indie filmmaker who had a wide release film that took everybody over by storm. Mr. Karen Tarantino and Mr. Pulp Fiction, I believe, was 93, if I'm remembering
94.
correctly. Oh, was it 94? I thought it
Yeah.
was 93. I always get those two mixed up. Never mind. I'm talking out of my ass again.
I
Hello,
watched it.
how are
I
you?
watched it 13 times in the theater between 94 and 95.
See, and that was I saw it. I had to see it not quite as many times as that, but
I
I
had
saw it
problems.
quite a few times. I dug it. No, Roger Rabbit's still the one that I've seen the most times in the theater,
How
at
many?
12 or 13 times, I think.
Wow.
I saw it in the theater. Yeah. A great story. If you ever caught the Roger Rabbit episode, if you didn't, here's the rehash. My grandfather, I went to see it with, because that's how I got to see it a dozen times, because I went with just about everybody I knew who hadn't seen it. We went to go see it because I wanted to see it again, because I loved that movie. Well, we're coming out of Roger Rabbit, and I believe Die Hard was in another theater at the time, and we snuck in to see Die Hard. If I remember correctly, because this was back when films stayed in theaters for a while. So, because Roger Rabbit had been there for a while, because I think it came out first before Die Hard, if I'm remembering correctly, but I got foggy old brain. But yeah, we snuck in to see Die Hard.
That checks out, because I think Roger Rabbit was a summer movie, and then Die Hard was around Christmas time, right? Is that right? Because I know it was a Christmas movie, but yeah, I didn't see it in the theater. I saw Die Hard at a sleepover when it first came out on video, because I was hosting the sleepover, and I got overruled by the other kids at the party because they wanted to rent Die Hard, and I was like, that looks stupid. Let's just rent the new Nightmare on Elm Street movie or whatever it was. And then, like, I remember crying and having like this hissy fit because I got overruled. And then we rented it, we put it on, and I felt like a heel, because at the end I was like, this is amazing, but I can't tell anybody that I liked it.
I can't tell anybody now that I like it, because, well, then that just goes against. Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, Die Hard was a summer movie. It looks like July 17th.
What?
It was released.
So when did Roger
Yeah.
Rabbit come out?
And Roger Rabbit was released June 26th. So yeah, so they were
Okay,
near
so there's
each
some good
other.
overlap there.
So yeah,
All right,
Roger
I
Rabbit
guess
had been in the theater for a while, and then we saw Die Hard. So
yeah, it makes sense, because Die Hard 2, that was also like a winter set movie that came out in the summer a few years later, right? Yeah.
That was the gimmick. That was the gimmick of, oh, hey, we're gonna do a Christmas movie in the summer.
Yeah.
that-
Wow.
but what was even better was the fact that we had the big tub of popcorn for refill. So we had bought that for Roger Rabbit, finished it at the end of Roger Rabbit. My grandfather snuck us into Die Hard, went out and got a refill for the bucket of popcorn.
That's what you do.
We must have refilled that sucker like 3 times. Good times, yeah. And so is Cronos good times. So there you have it, folks. Hope you enjoyed our discussion. If you didn't pick up last week, yes, the canon was pulled. And so next month is Hot Van Damme month.
Love it.
And yeah, we're doing Van Damme films. So at least 4 of them. People are trying to talk me into more. And I'm just like, you people are, there's so many want to talk about. But we're gonna do at least 4 next month of Van Damme films. So stay tuned for that. But now, as always, license to shill for my good friend here, Mr. Ian Simmons. So go ahead, Ian, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm Ian Simmons. I run Kicking the Seat, which you can find at kickseat.com. I also have the Kicking the Seat YouTube channel, which you can find if you go to YouTube and search Kicking the Seat. Do multiple episodes each week, interviews, movie reviews. And this week, in addition to the Wednesday Marvel live streams where we talk about the TV show What If, October 1st, Friday, we're going to be kicking off Scary Season with the Friday night live streams for Scare-a-thon. My good friend Aaron Christensen of Horror 101 with Dr. AC Every year he watches 31 movies during the course of Halloween season to raise money for charity. This year they're benefiting the Albany Park Theater Project, which is a very good cause. And we're going to be talking about movies live on Friday nights. And we're trying to get the schedule together to maybe have Mark on one of those shows. I'm still wrangling the old calendar. But yeah, good stuff. So drop in. It's like I said, it's live stream. So come hang out in the chat and talk some great movies this Friday, October 1st. If this is up before then, we'll be talking about cool. We'll be talking the 90th anniversary of Universal's Dracula and Frankenstein, neither of which I've seen yet. I've never seen them.
You think you know people. You think you know people.
Look, I've seen The Bride of Frankenstein and I've seen Creature from the Black Lagoon, but I've never seen Frankenstein and Dracula somehow.
Have you seen Dracula versus Frankenstein? No.
No, but we've been doing this series all year called Hammerland, where we're talking about the Frankenstein and Dracula movies from the Hammer films, and we figured, well, for scary season, let's just talk about where it all started. So this is going to be a big education for me.
Well, that should be fun. Definitely tune in for that, folks. And part of the reason why it's hard to schedule is October 8th and 9th. Independent horror cinema returns to Oshkosh once again. Yes, at the historic Time Community Theater, we are launching a new horror fest, the Sawdust City Fright Fest. It is on Friday, October 8th. We will be showing Manos Hands of Fate at the Time Community Theater, kind of kicking it off with the spirit. And then Saturday, October 9th, starting at, I believe it is 1 o'clock, there'll be 2 blocks of shorts, and we actually have some filmmakers who have made the shorts who are going to show up and do Q&As. And then that evening, we will be showing Manos Returns, directed by our wonderful friend and fellow crew member, Tanya Atomic. She got Jackie Rabin on it as well, the daughter from the original Manos Returns. They even have footage and got some scenes in with the original master as well in Manos Returns. So it's a very exciting couple of evenings that you can come to Oshkosh, come for the horror, and stay for Hot Dog Charlie's is really good there. There's a great hot dog place around the corner. So there you have it, folks. Thank you so much. And now I think we'll just say a good night, everyone.
Good night. Or buenos noches.